we are at the end of what I would describe as the public participation part. The conversation can go in any number of directions. We know what the various alternatives are. We can close the record if that is our thinking. What I'd recommend is maybe to help focus the conversation or shape the conversation, if I could get a sense of what people are thinking at this particular stage, having heard all of the testimony and the evidence both sides.
It is extremely unusual for us to get a case like this where 5 city bureaus are saying no, recommending that they don't have the information that they need to support the application. And can't remember seeing, it's not in the record, but the current hearings officer decision copies and pastes from the application or from the applicant's assertions to a remarkable degree. I can't find where the hearings officer says that this can be addressed with a condition of approval. There are places where I can't find that condition of approval, in particular with the landslide hazards and the grading that would be necessary for that. I'm also very concerned about the trees, both the street trees that are not present. Thank you, Ms. Andrews. But particularly the biggest tree on the lot, which was pointed out is under the Southwest Hills Protection Plan and the environmental review criteria, we're supposed to consider which, the subdivision, the whole plat is supposed to look at preserving the most significant resources, and it seems that that has not happened. Instead, this hearings officer has given a condition of approval that the city forester has to approve tree removal. Well, the city forester has said, no, we shouldn't be removing that tree. So I recognize that it has been a long process for everyone. I'm not convinced that the alternatives analysis has been fully vetted. I would be willing to approve the environmental violation review, which would mean that the restoration could start taking place. And then I believe that the applicant and the neighborhood should maybe go to a mediation and for a new application that fully involves the staff right from the beginning, rather than the hearings officer having to make multiple determinations based on evidence that's submitted very, very late in the process.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anybody else?
Well, I guess
Commissioner Saltzman.
I guess if I'm forced to make a decision today, I would try to get to a win-win decision. I think there was a lot of merit, obviously, in what the neighbors had to say about their concerns, but I also found a lot of merit in what the Griffith family had to say about how their efforts to make something work here. And I think that if the other members of the council were supportive and it's legal for us to do that, I would specify that we save the 54-inch tree as a condition of approval, that we require the clustered development that narrows lots 3 through 8 as being the chosen option. And I would support that. I think there is a need for housing in the city, and I do agree with that. We want people to be able to live and work in the city. And I think there's a lot of merit in the proposal in terms of replacing sanitary sewers in Ruby Creek and protecting Stevens Creek further. So yeah, I think there's merits to both sides, and if that's what I would propose as conditions of approval.
Commissioner Fish.
So Mayor, someone mentioned this has been a long day. Council started at 9:30, but I don't remember a more thoughtful set of presentations, and I also appreciated all the testimony. And even when we have a long day like this, I find these land use proceedings fascinating because we're getting at fundamental questions about the kind of city we want to live in and the future of our city. When we are called upon to make a decision because we're up against the clock or because we have to, this body has demonstrated time and time again they're willing to make a decision. I am frequently surprised by where we end up, which is another way of saying it's an honest process where everyone comes, listens to the testimony, and gives their best judgment. So I defy anyone to handicap the outcome of these kinds of things because we come with an open mind, and often the discussion that we have as colleagues shapes the final outcome. If I am required today to vote on this, I will vote to uphold the appeal. And I will do so largely on the basis of what Commissioner Fritz just identified, and I thought it was the most compelling part of Ms. Richter's closing. It was the last thing she said. There are simply too many Bureau conditions that have been deferred that require discretionary actions which will have to be decided, perhaps or not decided, because the bureaus may not, under a feasibility analysis, reach any kind of agreement. And those decisions will not be subject to any further hearing and public testimony. And Commissioner Fritz is absolutely right. There's a difference between putting conditions of approval that are sort of plain vanilla and simply punting on a whole host of things where the bureaus have significant disagreements about the project and expecting at some point it will be deferred, like, for example, BES on the stormwater, the feasibility of a stormwater facility in the disturbance area. It's a very big deal, and if I learned anything, that has potentially significant impact on the stability of the site and some of the consequences to neighbors. So if I have to vote today, Mayor, I would vote to uphold the appeal. I may do it on a narrower basis that Commissioner Fritz has proposed, and she's historically been the expert on this panel on these matters, so I would follow her lead on what we would be upholding. I think what Commissioner Saltzman has proposed as potentially a win-win always has merit. I am reluctant to decide here in my seat what should be the elements of a deal acceptable to the neighborhood and the developer. While I respect Dan has listened carefully and is in good faith offering a path forward, I think we've had more success getting in those situations where there is a genuine willingness to reach an agreement. We've had more success in the past simply calling a timeout, getting an agreement to stop the clock, which is at the applicant's discretion, and then either setting up a mediation or a process where it comes back to us knowing we are going to decide the case. So the incentive is either you work it out or there's going to be a binary choice, and you may or may not like it. And so we've done that. So Mayor, if I am required to vote, I will vote to uphold the appeal largely on the grounds that Commissioner Fritz has articulated, and I think Ms. Richter made very clear in her closing statement. My preference always is to have the parties reach their own mediated agreement because it's more sustainable, and I think there was a lot of nodding in this room when someone said that if not this development, there'll be some future development, that we're not going to stop. One cannot stop development on this property. The question is, what's the character of the development and how is it done? So I would welcome an opportunity to have the parties have some further dialogue, but that solely rests with the appellant, excuse me, is that right? The applicant, because only the applicant can waive the clock that we're under. And if we don't have additional time, then the council will, as we do in any case where we're required to, will render a decision.
Commissioner Eudaly?
I'm agreeing with Commissioner Fritz and Fish. I have significant concerns about the wildlife corridor, about the landslide issues, the trees, and it seems like almost everyone today has been saying things that were not previously in the record, so I'm hesitant to say this, but if I do want to say I'm disappointed to hear that multifamily was rejected. If we are going to have a sincere conversation about affordable housing and increasing our housing stock and density, then multifamily shouldn't be off the table, but frankly, $750,000, 3,500 square foot homes are not going to help either. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Thank you. Commissioner Fritz, you wanted to speak?
I appreciate all the comments of my colleagues, and I know the Mayor hasn't had a turn yet. I just wanted to weigh in again and say that we get one application fee, and the staff has put an enormous amount of work into this, basically pro bono at this point, that the taxpayers have been funding all of our staff's work. It's not possible to condition an approval based on saving that tree because the entire subdivision is based on having the street in that location. I would also concur with Commissioner Eudaly, and in fact, I'd go further And I asked the question at the beginning about the definition of the site, and my trusty staff gave me the information from the zoning code saying that the applicant can choose to define the site as the portion of ownership that is proposed for development. There is actually more property that's in the same ownership that is further towards the northeast that might be appropriate for some multifamily units that be much closer to Macadam that would have better sight lines on Taylor's Ferry. And so I believe that the best option is to start over with the understanding that I'm hearing from everybody that something should go on this property and that there needs to be a very good faith working together, recognizing that we certainly, I don't think anybody wants to get to this point again, whether it's quickly or slowly. We want to get to a better design that has full engagement by everybody from the beginning.
I agree with the thrust of my colleagues. And so as the applicant, you can count the votes. And my suspicion is you don't want us to take the vote today. But it's your call. And so if you're willing to take another swing at this, this is your call. I happen to agree with a lot of the public value that you've put on the table. There is a significant amount of public value being put on the table. I am very concerned about the city's own process, and I'll have a different conversation with different people about that at a different time. But it is very notable that we had a hearings officer come to a conclusion with so many critical city bureaus still not confident in the answers that had been provided. And in my opinion, that is an unacceptable place to land. And I'm not willing to leave the unanswered or the open or the ambiguous questions to chance. They're too significant in my mind. So we can take the vote and we can go home, or if you'd like, Commissioner Fritz.
I just would like to get staff's assessment on the feasibility of just continuing this process versus starting over. Because I'm very concerned about the precedent we set.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to start over. I think,
Looks like
Dan, after.
If we vote to uphold the appeal, then it's either starts over or gets appealed.
Yeah, that's
by
correct.
And the city attorney
Dan,
wants to
just
say
listening to and weighing the evidence, came up with one possible reasonable solution. I'm not saying that is the solution, but I don't think you have to start from ground zero. I think there's an opportunity here, as Dan said, for a win-win, but again, it's not our call, that's the applicant's call.
City attorney wanted to say something.
Generally speaking, we don't really like to give you legal advice that boxes you. I want to make sure you have reasonable options. I'm a little concerned on this particular case. We often, as you mentioned, we often give the parties the opportunity to go back, talk, figure out another option. In this particular case, state law has some limitations on how many extensions we may grant, and we're there. And if the applicant wishes to talk about that, that's fine, but I want to make sure that's on the record.
Fair enough. We had a request for staff, city staff, to come back, please. Commissioner Fritz.
I just would like your experienced assessment of the question of staff time and whether it would be better to start over or to try to amend this proposal.
Well, I can try to speak to that again. I'm Kate Green.
Is your microphone on, Kate?
Yeah, it is.
On.
Oh, there you go.
There we go. As a reminder, this is an on-the-record hearing, so there really isn't the opportunity to accept new evidence, such as an alternative new plan that hasn't been presented or discussed or evaluated. And the plan that was mentioned as far as clustering and modifying to preserve a tree or other trees, that plan isn't in the record, and there's been no evaluation of such a plan. And I believe that a new application would be necessary to undertake that evaluation.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think it's cleaner, too. I mean, it says, I think, Mayor, it was useful to hear from a number of people that development is inevitable, so this is not a question of holding back progress forever. But if given the state of the record and the fact that so many bureaus have hedged their bet and deferred doing analysis, landing on some of the questions that they were asked, I think in some ways it's more productive to go back to square one. Have a different set of alternatives presented with a friendly admonition that should it ever come back to us, it is not helpful to our determination to have both sides say disparaging things about each other. And I would say to those who are opponents of whatever is being proposed, I think we all ought to adhere to high standards of how we engage in these processes. And likewise, when we have the other side commenting on a hearing officer or the level of behavior, that doesn't help us make a decision. When we have records in the evidence about emails that are open to interpretation, that does not help us reach a decision. What helps us reach a decision is have the parties, has the applicant put a reasonable proposal on the table? Does it conformity with state law? Has there been an honest engagement of the neighborhood? And then, and only then, does it come to us if there's something to be resolved. But this body would much prefer to have those decisions decided by the applicant and the community that's impacted. And usually we get better outcomes when that happens. My 2 cents.
So I move that we approve the appeal of the South Burlingame Neighbourhood Association against the hearings officer's decision to approve with conditions Macadam Ridge, a 21-lot subdivision, environmental review with modifications, but approve the environmental review section of this application.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Fritz. We have a second from Commissioner Fish.
Mayor, this is
Did I
just
state it correctly, City Attorney?
Yes?
I think you said you want to approve the environmental violation review. I think you said.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Did I not say that?
I think you said the environmental review.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. So
is this a tentative?
So let me try again. It's very late. I'm reading from a paper and I literally did not do it correctly. Uphold the appeal of the South Burlingame Neighbourhood Association against the hearings officer's decision to approve with conditions Macadam Ridge, a 21-lot subdivision, environmental withdrew with modifications. Period.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Fritz. We have
And
a second.
and then approve the environmental review
Violation review.
violation.
So, Council, what do you want us to do
dang it,
now?
I did it again.
So I'm
The
wondering,
environmental violation review, thank you. Got there.
so Sean, would it be possible to put that language up on the screen from your staff report? Or is that too challenging?
Oh, that would be very, very helpful. I was trying to find that and I couldn't at this hour dig that out. Was there a second to mine? Usually
Commissioner
second.
Fish.
Yeah. And while you're finding that, I would just note that the applicant gets to choose at the very beginning of the process whether this appeal was on the record or not, and that's why we're in this situation.
And to be clear, it's a tentative vote, and we'll be coming back with findings next Wednesday morning.
Thank you.
It's the 14th, right?
Yeah.
So Commissioner Fritz, are you identifying the fourth
Yes.
motion as your motion?
The one that's currently
With the
highlighted.
exception of approval, yes, that's the one.
So perhaps we could get a new second, because the language has changed a bit.
Second.
We needed to update the second. It's getting a little tiresome.
So we have a motion from Commissioner Fritz. We have a second from Commissioner Eudaly.
So we'll take a tentative vote.
This is a tentative vote. The final vote would be next Wednesday, February 14th, during the council's AM session. Call the roll.
We need to state the time. Yes,
Yes, we need a time certain, please.
it'll be 11:30.
11:30, February 14th will be the final vote.
I'm sorry, 11. I've got a couple other items here.
And by the way, given our
11
recent,
a.m. Okay,
given our
so,
recent history, Mayor, I think we should let people know that's probably closer to 12.
yeah, no
Or
kidding.
three.
So
Or three.
this is a tentative vote. The final vote will be on February 14th, Wednesday, 11 a.m. Portland City Hall. Be there. On the tentative vote, call the roll.
Fritz.
This has been a really great hearing, lots of really good testimony, very well organised. I'm very, very impressed with everybody who spoke. Thank you to the staff. I know that you have worked really hard to try to get to. Yes, I do believe that this property will be developed, and I think everybody's aware of that. So I think there's a lot of scope. It's a big property. There's lots of different parts of it. I hope that I hope it doesn't come back on appeal, because I hope you can get to something that can be approved by the hearings officer. If it does, then I will be looking for significantly different alternatives that greatly reduce the disturbance area, do look after the values of the upland forest. I think that was part of the testimony that was very compelling to me, is that the resource values identified in the Southwest Hills Protection Plan include values of the upland forest by itself rather than just as protectors of the creeks. And I also am very concerned about the landslide hazards. Usually, given that the whole of West Portland is in a landslide hazard area, I don't give much credence to that. I think the testimony that was presented today and that's in the record is compelling, that this site needs particularly careful evaluation for both the streets and the lots to see, to make sure that that landslide hazards is diminished both during construction and afterwards. And to me, that would entail retaining some of the trees both during and after construction. Aye.
Fish.
I want to echo what my colleague just said. I think this has been an exemplary hearing. I think it's important that we acknowledge the Griffith family legacy of how they have managed this property and the business. It is my hope that as a result of our action, that there can be some resolution of the differences and a proposal that gets approval. I would hope this does not come back to us, assuming this is not appealed. If it does, I too will be looking closely at impact on trees, impact on the wildlife corridor that the Olmsted brothers over 100 years ago identified as one of the most significant natural features of the west side, erosion control and impact and mitigation measures, and how the stormwater is managed on site. Aye.
Saltzman.
Well, excuse me. Well, I see heads nodding about this property will ultimately be developed. I'm not sure I'm totally convinced that's the sentiment of everybody who may be most affected by development of this tract of property. And that's just kind of the way we are in Portland. You know, intellectually, we all accept growth and density and all that, but when it comes right down to something in our backyard, it's an entirely different issue. So I'm not going to impugn anybody's motives here, but I will say this, that I think we're better off having this property developed by the Griffith family than some out-of-town developer from California that's going to swoop this up if the Griffith family tosses their hands up and says, we can't do anything with it, you try. And they're going to have a lot more resources to bear, and I think this council has spoken, just about everybody here, saying we see this being developed too. So I think it's just a question, it's, you know, my admonition to everybody here is you should come up with a solution that works with the Griffith family. I think that's the best bet to environmentally sensitive development that will provide home ownership opportunities. Now, I would like to see a multifamily option considered as much as anybody else because it does speak more to the affordable housing crisis. But as I said earlier, you know, home ownership is a good thing, period, for people to be able to live near where they work. So that's where I'm coming down. I'm going to support the appeal at this point, but this isn't going to go away, and I think the neighbors are best dealing with the current owners of the property to come up with something, and I think the current owners of the property have gone a long ways, I think, towards offering some options here that do provide public owners or public open space as well as environmentally sensitive development. It's not totally there, you know, like save that tree, but it's probably closer than we're going to get with some out-of-town ownership coming in to develop this piece of property. Aye.
Eudaly.
As is often the case with these land use hearings, it's really preferable if opposing sides can come to an amenable agreement, because as Commissioner Saltzman mentioned, sometimes there's a much less desirable alternative than what either side is hoping for. So I vote aye, and I hope this can move forward.
Wheeler.
I want to thank Dan for setting the right tone, which is we want to get to a yes win-win on this. And I want to acknowledge the Griffin family. You are an old Portland family. You have contributed mightily and positively to this community, and you've put some wonderful ideas on the table. And to the community, I would say this: you've raised very reasonable objections today, compelling objections in terms of where we are today. It is my view that this is a complex site for obvious reasons. It has all the overlay issues, but ultimately it is a developable site, and it is my belief that it will be developed. And so now the question is simply, how do we shape that development, and where do we take it from here? So I hope all of us can take this as a serious challenge, rise to the occasion, and get to the point where we are saying yes. So I concur with my colleagues on this. Thank you for everybody who is here today. I know that ultimately there are many people disappointed by this decision today, but I think it is the right decision for today. I vote aye. The motion is approved, 5-0. We are adjourned.